Get informed, get inspired, and get connected. CannabisRadio.com presents NCIA's Cannabis Industry Voice. The National Cannabis Industry Association is the only national trade organization representing the businesses of the legal cannabis industry. NCIA's Cannabis Industry Voice covers a range of topics, including the rapidly evolving political and policy changes that affect our industry, news and events of importance to cannabis professionals, and features on companies, individuals, and campaigns at the cutting edge of the cannabis industry. NCIA's Cannabis Industry Voice begins now. Hello, thanks for tuning in to another episode of NCIA's Cannabis Industry Voice on Cannabis Radio. I'm your host, Bethany Moore. I'm the Deputy Director of Communications at the National Cannabis Industry Association. I'm pleased to be talking with one of our longtime members, Tony Frischknecht. He's the founder of Essential Extraction Corporation, based in Loveland, Colorado, which supplies the necessary tools and knowledge for anyone to be able to extract their own botanical essential oils. In 2005, Tony got his start in the medical marijuana industry in Fort Collins, Colorado. He founded a small marijuana caregiving business called Highway to Healing. In the following years, he was involved in a number of cannabis businesses, including O.penvape, Organa Brands, and Ideal Harvest. He's also an author of a book called From Black Market to the Man, sharing his experience in the cannabis industry. And he also has a podcast called Plant Problems Podcast. Hello, Tony. Welcome to the show.
Bethany, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. Great to talk with you. You have tons of experience in our industry, so I think this will be a great conversation. But let's start for our listeners to learn more about you and your background. I know I said a lot in the intro about the various things you've done, but what did you do before getting involved in the cannabis industry?
So I actually worked with my hands. I grew up, my father was a carpenter pretty much my entire life. So I spent a lot of time in his shop, drilling holes in pieces of wood, nailing things, painting things, doing a bunch of little side stuff that he didn't want to do. So kind of taught me how to work with my hands at a really young age. I was probably in there in between 7, 8, 9, 10 and up. Then going into my high school, middle school, high school years, I got my first full-time job in the summertime, of course, at 13. And I was doing remodeling on exterior of homes. And then as I graduated high school, I went into work doing that full-time. And then I was trying to find my way because I knew there was a place for me, but it wasn't necessarily a job. And when I say that, I mean a 9 to 5. And also going along with working with my hands and doing labor work, I was good at it. However, I didn't see a big future in that. So as I started my entrepreneurial experience in my early 20s, I kind of transitioned from labor through the food industry, indoor sales. I did a lot of that. And then I got into fix and flips on housing in real estate remodels. So, and then that transitioned me into, of course, the 2005 era that you spoke about a few minutes ago.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a great background. My dad also liked to do woodworking as the hobby, actually, and I believe our woodworking shed in the backyard was just as big as our house. So I can totally relate to that. So moving along, in 2005, you took a different path. What happened there? You got involved in the cannabis movement, which is now an industry. How did that shift happen?
So in Colorado, early 2000s, late 1999, 2000, up until about 2005 time, there was a housing boom happening. I know a lot of us are seeing that right now. So this is basically what was going on in Colorado. And so I thought that that was a great time to start doing fix and flips. However, I caught on the tail end of that trend, and unfortunately, it made it tough to make a living doing so. uh, as I was building my first real business, I was keeping my eyes open for new opportunities. And so that's where I kind of started looking into cannabis. And a little bit of a personal story is I didn't really think about it too much until my mom actually was diagnosed with leukemia in late '99. So as I started talking about the cannabis industry with a couple different people, I didn't seem to find it so taboo because I knew my mom had used some for her, so she could eat and for her pain. I didn't see her ever use it, but I found her pipe laying around her bed a few different times, and I knew it was happening. I hadn't smoked any at that point, but then when I started exploring cannabis, I was like, well, this might be the direction. So then I kind of transitioned to that, and I'm sure we'll dig into a little bit more of that.
Yes, absolutely. Well, your mom was ahead of the curve there. It's great to see some of the older generation using an herb, a plant that they need to feel better for sure. And that was over 20 years ago. So I hope it was helpful.
Yeah, it was very new back then. I mean, if you think about the medical happened in 2000, right, in Colorado, and in 96, I believe, California. So it was really early when she was actually using that for a medication.
Sure. Yeah, it definitely wasn't cool yet. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so moving to present day, the company that you're running is called Essential Extraction Corporation. I'm sure there's many other things happening, but what's going on with you these days with that company and your other focus toward the future?
Yeah, so I was able to take a lot of my experiences in cannabis over the last decade and really start figuring out what can I bring that's different. The thing that everybody loves about cannabis, at least what I've seen, is the plant. They want to be able to they want to be able to make a profit off of selling the flower. And I've seen that, but it's a really challenging business because you have a lot of competition. So I got together with a couple other industry pioneers, and we started talking about, well, what could we create that could help a wider variety of people. And so we started looking at um, these different extractions, because I'm super familiar with extractions as part of my history in different businesses with O.penvape that you mentioned before. So we had some extensive knowledge in that, and we thought that there was a lot more to share, and a lot get more people involved in understanding what extraction is, because extraction has been in our lives. It's been all of my life. And if you wanted to go back to several centuries with steam distillation and stuff like that, which is a form of extraction. So we thought, well, let's take something that's sounds highly sophisticated. Let's try to simplify it and make it available to the small startup business, and also people that are just interested in creating their own formulations of different oils. So not only this journey started with the cannabis and THC in mind, however, it's kind of migrated into essential oils. And so that's why we started the company, and that's why we're heading down this road right now.
Gotcha. Yes, extraction, definitely. We can extract cannabis for oils and to either consume through vaporizers or to infuse into edibles or tinctures. But yes, the extractions of all sorts of other plants like lavender and other essential oils, like you were mentioning, are used in so many products, perfumes, for example, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And all those, and there's also synthetic essential oils, right? because they are cheaper. They can create these things through chemistry. So something like this, we wanted to be able to allow people to have control, because so much of around our world right now, people want to know what's in their product. Well, there's no other way there's no better way of knowing what's in it is if you create it. So that's where we saw an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Empowering, the average person to take their extractions into their own hands and create a product exactly as they would like. And who knows, that could also create some entrepreneurial ambitions. Once somebody really gets into it, it could start as a hobby and then turn into a career, I think.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You hit the nail on the head. The extraction machines that are out there in the majority of the world right now, super expensive. So we're trying to minimize the size of these things and make them affordable for anybody to take advantage of them.
Sure, absolutely. All right, let's take our first commercial break and then come right back and chat more with Tony about his journey in the cannabis industry. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
NCIA's Cannabis Industry Voice will return once we give a voice to our sponsors.
Dazed and Infused. Join sugar industry expert Latham Woodward for a happier hour each week for a lively and often hilarious discussion on the infusion of cannabis into food, beverages, and life. Explore exciting new culinary landscape trends with fascinating friends and guests who are leading the industry into the uncharted mainstream. Discover curated menus, enhanced cocktails, and live tastings. Life's a little sweeter here on Dazed and Infused.
Get informed, get inspired, and get connected with more of NCIA's Cannabis Industry Voice, only on CannabisRadio.com.
All right, we're back on NCIA's Cannabis Industry Voice on Cannabis Radio. I'm your host, Bethany Moore with NCIA, talking with Tony Frischknecht, who currently is running Essential Extraction Corporation. But as I've hinted at, he has had a long journey through the cannabis industry, even before more formal medical cannabis programs began. So, Tony, how did that work back then?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. It was a completely different world. The majority of people had heard about medical cannabis. They weren't really sure where to access it. They didn't know, well, if I had access to purchasing it legally, who would I buy it from? Where would I find it? There's no stores. It was, a lot of the issues of creating this demand, but there's nowhere to fulfill that demand. And so when I started, I want to clarify to everybody out there, when I wrote my book, From Black Market to the Man, I didn't really understand the meaning with black market. And so, talking about as a legacy market, which, I was introduced to a few years ago, kind of opened my eyes. So please don't let the title throw you off. It's still got some great information. But the legacy market is where I dipped my toe into first. It wasn't for very long, because I tell you what, the stress that is involved behind that is immense. Because you're doing something that's highly illegal, that most people wouldn't be doing. And of course, you can't talk to anybody about it. And you've got to make sure, you're covering your tracks so you're not leading anybody to you so you can get in trouble. So for the first year and a half, that's what I was dealing with. And then I was like, there's got to be a way for me to do this on the legal end. I understand that medical cannabis is coming forward, but I really don't understand how to get involved. And I really had to take a leap of faith. I had to go get my medical card, which was very interesting back then, because there was basically one doctor in the entire state that would sign these prescriptions, but I didn't know anybody who had a prescription for cannabis. So what is it going to take for me to get that, right? So again, leap of faith and reaching out in those areas of uncomfortability that us as entrepreneurs have to do in order to grow. And not just for entrepreneurs, but anybody. You just got to step out of your comfort zone. So, quick story. I find out where to get my my cannabis card or my prescription, and I go down to Denver. I spend an entire day in this small little office with about 250 other people.
Huh.
and they basically needed some information from my doctor, so that they could fall within the regulations. And back then the regulations were really minimal. A lot of it was for pain. That was the majority of the reason why people got their prescription. But there was anxiety, there was and so on. But it was basically, you paid your $200 fee, you stand there and waited, and then when your name was called, which it took like 6 hours, you walk in the door and you speak with the doctor. And of course, you guys out there, probably a lot of you guys are familiar, you understand how that conversation goes. but that was really the beginning of this. And then going into how am I going to be a caregiver? All right, so how am I going to do this? So I had a couple close friends that had started me out in the industry. A close friend of mine, he actually owned a hydroponic store, and I would kick around ideas with him, and we start talking back and forth. Well, you can only grow so many patients. You can only grow so many plants. How many plants would that take? And then you just kind of go down the entrepreneurial story of, okay, what is it going to take to put this together legally, so that if I do have to deal with the Fed or DEA or local police, how am I going to protect myself?
Sounds like a very, very lonely journey back then, for sure. Couldn't tell anybody, kind of had to keep everything hidden. Like you were saying, don't lead people back to you.
Yeah. And even in the medical side, because it was just such a gray area, you weren't really sure how, you weren't really sure who and how to trust anyone, because nobody knew about how to, know the police didn't know for sure. So they would just, if anything happened, they would just say, okay, well, we're going to put you in jail now and we'll figure it out later. And so you didn't want to deal with that, right?
No. Wow. Well, fast forward to now, where we have a legal industry, and I can walk into a dispensary, show my ID, look at a menu, and tell them exactly what I want, pay for it, and walk out. It's great. I think most of us understand that this legal industry would not exist without the years and years of advocacy on behalf of like hundreds of cannabis activists across the country, from California to Washington, D.C. And I personally was based in Maryland in the 2000s and was involved in medical patient advocacy with the group Americans for Safe Access. And God, it was a different time. What are some of your memories from the advocacy years?
I remember meeting some very, very dedicated people out there. There were some people that all they wanted to do was, they didn't understand why the plant was illegal and why there were so many issues with it, and they didn't see anything wrong with it. And that was a small majority, but they were starting to fill meeting halls with people like this to talk about safety and consumption of medical cannabis, and how try to drum up these ideas of how me as a medical patient can have safe access. And a lot of the grassroots of this was safe access to medicine. I know that's not talked about nearly as much as it used to be, right? Because there's a lot bigger things to deal with right now. But that was the whole, that at least in Colorado, that was kind of the whole movement. It's like, okay, we know people need it. We've got these people that they've got, serious illnesses, cancer, AIDS, so many other things that they need it. But How can we get them safe access? And so I would go into some of these meeting halls, whether it be city council or just a, locality meeting where they invite people in and have open discussions. And like 9 out of 10 people were advocating for the, safety part of this. And then every now, well, they would for sure throw 1 to 2 law enforcement in every time. And it was funny because you would see them and you're like, they're there just because they were told to be there, because they never had any really good arguments for it. And so that was a big hurdle, right? Getting over this and just not talking about, well, it should be safe. Okay, so once we got to that, then we started talking about, well, these different stores and opening up dispensaries, and how are we going to regulate that? And then of course in Colorado we had a big explosion of what they called the Green Mile, which was south of downtown, and all these dispensaries started popping up, and the city put the brakes on and said, whoa, we're not going to just have a Starbucks or a weed store on every corner. That was the title they kept putting out there against cannabis. So what had happened is all of a sudden that put on the brakes, and then we started talking about real regulation. That's when I really started seeing the movement happen, and people started understanding. Medical patients, though, are truly the heart of where all this started, and it's been a great run for them. And I know they a lot of them would frown on the regulations that are involved, but it all started with safety. And that took a lot of effort between the people, entrepreneurs in the industry, and the regulators. So that was a big part of why we moved forward so quickly here.
Yeah. I quick anecdote. I remember sitting in a similar hearing in Annapolis, Maryland. We had brought nurses, doctors, patients, advocates to share their testimonies, and just the questions back then, if I knew then what I know now, they were saying, how can we guarantee that there's no PCP in the marijuana? Just ridiculous, and like, well, we have laboratory testing here in the future for not only that, but toxins, heavy metals, pesticides, all that, fungus. So it's been quite a journey. Absolutely. On that note, let's take our next commercial break and come right back and wrap up our chat with Tony Frischknecht of Essential Extraction Corporation. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
NCIA's Cannabis Industry Voice will return once we give a voice to our sponsors.
Elevate your everyday with that Shoogies feeling, with the sweet taste of Shoogies. Add a cup of Shoogies to your morning coffee. Ah, how sweet it is. Shoogies infuses cannabis and cane sugar to make it the perfect sweetener with benefits. Make your happy hour happier with a dunk of Shoogies in your drink. Order your Shoogies now at shoogies.com or find it in dispensaries throughout California. Whenever you crave a little sweet, pick up Shoogies, the sweet take anywhere treat.
Get informed, get inspired, and get connected with more of NCIA's Cannabis Industry Voice, only on CannabisRadio.com.
All right, we're back on NCIA's Cannabis Industry Voice on Cannabis Radio, chatting with Tony Frischknecht. And we're talking about his many years long journey through the cannabis movement and industry before former medical cannabis programs even began. And then the rules changed again as the caregiver program became medical marijuana, and then medical marijuana got its partner in adult use, which some people call recreational. Wow, what are some takeaways that you have from just all of that change, and every day something new and new regulations, and just trying to keep up on navigating the legal regulated cannabis industry with constantly changing rules?
Yeah, so you definitely have to be fluid. You have to be fluid with your business plan. You've got to be fluid on the directions you take as a business person, because as regulations are being built, it's just this ebb and flow. So you think you're growing, and all of a sudden a hurdle jumps in front of you that's thrown out by regulatory, or they're seeing something on the horizon that they don't like and they're going to stop it. You have to really suck up all the effort you put into one and just transition over to the next part. And as an entrepreneur, that's definitely well known, but even more so in this, because a lot of the stuff that you have to find your route through is something that you're doing for the first time and the regulators are doing for the first time. So I think one of my best things to offer, advice to offer the listeners here is if you are in the cannabis industry and this is what your focus is, make sure you get in there and start building those relationships ASAP. These guys will make your life so much better. They're going to tell you what needs to happen before you actually see a rule and regulation created by it. It's going to save you so much time. And it also allows you to help form and create these regulations that are coming out that are going to be regulating your business.
So true. And, speaking of making the right connections, we had our 6th annual Cannabis Business Summit and Expo 2 years ago at this point. Gosh, we were in San Jose and you were in attendance. It was a great show. It was pre-COVID. It was in the before time. But we are really happy to be getting back to the business of hosting our educational trade shows. Our 7th annual Cannabis Business Summit and Expo is happening this December in just a few weeks here, December 15th, 16th, and 17th in San Francisco at the Moscone Center. So be sure to check that out. The website's www.cannabisbusinesssummit.com. I'm going to have the podcast studio on the Expo floor conducting some interviews. We've got great keynote speakers, of course, the huge Expo floor. So that's a great place to not only meet people, but also enjoy our educational panel sessions as well, with some really great thought leaders and pioneers such as yourself speaking from experience. So I hope to see you in San Francisco, Tony, in just a few weeks here. And thanks for being a member of NCIA all these years as well. Where can people find out more about you or your work?
So very easily. So I've got 2 podcasts. Of course, is the EE podcast, which is extractionessentials.com. You can go there and find that. I know it's just flip-flop, just essential extraction essentials. Just flip-flop that for the podcast. And I also have plantproblem.com. That's plantproblem.com. I speak about majority business on plantproblem.com. On the Extraction Essentials podcast, we talk about the little extractor and how we can extract different formulations. So this is a great one for the novice or somebody just looking into what is extraction. It's a very simple thing. I talked to a lot of really interesting guys that are helping develop these formulations. Also, you brought this up. We have in October, I love the San Jose event, guys. I want to push this. This is a great one to go to. San Jose is a great place for events. So NCI, thank you for putting that on. But we are also going to be at an event coming up at the end of October at MJ BizCon 2 as well. We're going to be booth number 7238. So guys, if you want to come learn about the extraction machine, please come check us out there. There'll be 3 or 4 of us around there and we can talk to you guys all about that. So Bethany, thanks so much for having me on. This was great for me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It was great chatting with you. And, it's nice to talk to people that have been in this movement turned industry to see the whole journey as well. So thank you for keeping up with it. And thanks to our listeners. Thanks to our listeners for tuning in to another episode of the Cannabis Industry Voice. Until next time.
The opinions expressed on this CannabisRadio.com program are those of the guests and hosts and do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of CannabisRadio.com. Any rebroadcast, republication, or retransmission of this program without proper consent is prohibited.